My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm 67 years old. For 3 decades I worked as the librarian at Brookfield High, the kind who remembered which student loved mysteries, who slipped poems into lockers before exams, and who could forgive a late book with a wink. I've been a mother for 40 years, a wife for nearly 4 decades, and a widow for the last 2. And tonight I'm standing upstairs in a house no one knows belongs to me, listening to my daughter-in-law give a grand tour of what she believes is her new home. She doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know I bought this place in secret with the life insurance my husband left behind. She doesn't know I spent the past 6 weeks overseeing every last detail. The paint colors, the light fixtures, even the drawer pulls. But she's already carving it up like a cake at a party. Down below, her voice bounces against the polished wood. "The master bedroom will be mine," Serena declares, her laugh tapering off in a way that feels more like smoke than joy. Then, almost offhand as though assigning scraps, she adds, "My mom can have the room next door." The words land sharp. She meant her mother, not me. I look around at the south-facing room I had chosen for myself, with its warm light and original trim. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place where I could breathe again, where books could be read without interruption, where silence was not emptiness but healing. My fingers curl tight around the banister. They don't see me. To them I am still the quiet background, like wallpaper. Something old. Something inherited but not cherished. So I wait. I let them finish their tour, listen while they dream aloud about tearing down walls, about turning the library I planned into a yoga studio. I wait until they leave, still laughing, still sure of their own importance. And then I act. By nightfall, every lock in the house is changed. The front door, the back entrance, even the narrow hatch leading to the basement. Whatever key Serena might have now, it will mean nothing by morning. I call Lily, my lawyer's assistant, and schedule a full security system. Cameras, motion lights, alerts straight to my phone. This house will know only me. I brew tea in the kitchen. The blue and white tiles, the farmhouse sink, the antique brass fixtures. They were my choices. The contractor had argued for sleek and modern, but no. Serena would have gutted it in a heartbeat. This home wasn't built for her. It was built for quiet. For a new beginning I never had the first time. I open the kitchen drawer, find a notepad, and write a single line. Folding the paper, I leave it neatly on the counter beside the cinnamon candle she had smeared it last week. "Smells like old lady perfume," she'd muttered. I light the candle. Its scent rises, soft and steady, curling into the air like memory. Tomorrow she'll come back. She'll try her keys, confused then angry. She'll call my son, maybe curse the realtor. She'll step into the kitchen searching for answers. And she'll find my note. This house already has an owner. I am no longer invisible. When she laid claim to the master bedroom as if it were a prize, something hardened inside me. But the truth is that change began months ago. 3 months back, on a Tuesday that smelled of lilies and tasted of dust, I lost Philip. One moment we were sipping tea. The next he was gone, taken by a sudden stroke. No whispered farewells, no time to hold his hand, only the unfinished crossword folded beside his untouched mug. I had sat at our dining room table that day, surrounded by silence, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The chair across from me was still pushed back, as though Philip had just risen to stretch his legs. The silence in the dining room pressed down heavy, louder than any sound. That was when Serena appeared at my doorstep. She wasn't empty-handed. She carried a tuna casserole tucked under foil and 2 bottles of juice with labels that promised health and purity. Her mother's recipe, she explained, soothing and full of protein. Mark came in behind her, quieter, his eyes darting from me to the floor to the windows, checking to see if I had eaten, if I had dressed, if I seemed like someone about to collapse. "Mom, the house is too big for you now," he said as he lowered himself into the same chair where Philip used to nap on Sundays. I didn't answer. I only held the teacup I'd been clutching all afternoon, a wedding gift from Philip's aunt, delicate silver etched with ivy. One of the last things I'd polished before the funeral. The tea inside still carried warmth, but my fingers remained chilled. That week they returned more often than they ever had before. Each visit brought fresh suggestions. Serena's voice was always bright, persuasive. "Somewhere with an elevator would be easier for you. Have you thought about moving closer to the children? There's a community in Brookstone. Wellness care, activities, everything you'd need." I smiled. I nodded. I told myself it was kindness. Grief blurs judgment, makes manipulation look like concern. Mark mowed the lawn twice even though the grass hadn't grown. Serena reorganized my spice rack without asking, then turned to me with that gleaming smile. "You deserve a fresh start, Evelyn." She had started calling me by my first name, dropping Mom, like a coat she no longer needed. It felt transactional, as though I were a client about to be persuaded into a deal. One evening they stayed for dinner. I made rosemary chicken, Philip's favorite, skin crisp and golden. The kitchen filled with the scent of herbs and home. We ate on the porch, the summer air still warm, children's laughter carrying from down the street. Serena refilled her wine glass, leaned forward with casual ease and said, "It might be time to think practically." I didn't reply. I let the steam rise from my teacup. She pressed on. "The house, it's charming, but it's old. Plumbing, wiring, you could sell it. Move somewhere smaller, safer. You wouldn't need so much money." The word lingered, heavy, an unspoken question. I placed my teacup gently on its saucer, the way I always had, and let silence answer for me. That night after they left, I walked through each room alone. The living room with the stubborn floorboard Philip never wanted repaired. The hallway lined with photographs from Mark's graduation. The guest room where Rachel once spilled glitter that still shimmered faintly in the carpet fibers. Every space hummed with memory, but beneath it all was a sharper truth. This was no longer a home. It was only a holding place. The next morning I dialed Lily. Years ago she had guided Philip and me through estate planning, her voice calm and steady. "I want to buy a house in secret," I told her. She didn't ask why. She simply said, "I know exactly how." After that dinner on the porch, after Serena told me I wouldn't need so much money, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. I opened the envelope Philip had left, the one I had avoided for days. Heavy, official, carrying the scent of decisions and permanence. Inside was the truth. He had been paying into a life insurance policy for more than 2 decades. And he had left it all to me. I sat in Philip's old armchair, the same one Serena had once suggested I donate, and stared at the number printed across the page. It was larger than I had imagined, enough to startle me. But what struck deeper than the figure was the message hidden beneath it, almost as if I could hear Philip himself. "I know what you sacrificed. I want you to have something that belongs only to you." That was when the idea began to take shape. Not a condo chosen for me by someone else. Not a room borrowed in another person's house. A place that was mine. I scheduled a visit to the law office Philip and I had trusted for years. The same office where thick files labeled Hartwell Family Trust were probably still tucked away in a back cabinet. I expected little had changed. The heavy leather chairs, the slow wall clock, the faint smell of dust and polish. But the man we had always met with was gone, retired. In his place was a young woman with warm eyes and a steady handshake. Her name was Lily Jensen. When I entered, she stood quickly, then hesitated. "You're Mrs. Hartwell, aren't you?" I nodded. A shy smile crossed her face. "I hope this isn't strange, but my father, Thomas Jensen, he still remembers you. 9th grade, Brookfield High. He says you were the first person who ever made him feel smart. That reading list you gave him, he still talks about it." The words caught me off guard. I hadn't heard my name spoken like that in years. With respect, with memory. Since leaving the library, since losing Philip, I had slipped into invisibility. Just Mark's mother. Just Serena's mother-in-law. Not Evelyn. Not someone who mattered. I looked down quickly, but Lily had noticed. She handed me a tissue without a word. For a moment, the two of us sat quietly in that office that smelled of polished wood. Me, an aging widow blinking fast, and her, a stranger who had unknowingly reminded me that once, I had mattered far more than casseroles and checklists. We spoke business. I told her I wanted to buy a house quietly, without family involvement, without my name attached. Could it be done? She nodded. Of course. A trust will give you privacy, independence, and clean lines. I answered simply, "That's what I want." No expectations. We spent the next 2 weeks building the trust. We named it after Philip's initials, PSH Legacy Trust. It felt right. A continuation of him, but something for me. I began driving neighborhoods on quiet afternoons. I wanted trees and sidewalks, houses with history. Not glass towers, but porches and chimneys, rooms that breathed. And then, on a Saturday morning, I found it. A red brick Victorian on Elmhurst Avenue. 6 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a porch swing that groaned softly in the wind, and a turret like something from an old storybook. It looked like the kind of house I had once dreamed about as a girl but never thought would belong to me. It needed work, yes, but the bones were strong. It felt unspoiled, waiting. It felt mine. I told no one. Not Mark. Not Serena. Not even my sister. Lily handled every step. Inspection, title, closing. And on the day it was final, she called me. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hartwell," she said, her voice bright. "You're a homeowner again." That evening, I walked through the house alone, my footsteps echoing off the bare walls, the quiet stretching wide and full. For the first time in years, the silence felt like possibility. My footsteps rang out across the bare floors. No furniture yet, no photographs, no history inside these walls, but I whispered a promise aloud just to anchor myself. "You're allowed to keep something for yourself." The house didn't disagree. From the moment I first walked through the door on Elmhurst Avenue, I didn't feel like a stranger intruding. It was more like stepping into a memory I hadn't lived yet. The air carried dust and wood polish, with a faint hint of citrus that must have been sprayed to sweeten the showing. But none of that mattered because I could already see it. The bones were strong. 3 stories of red brick, narrow windows stretching tall, a wraparound porch with peeling paint that didn't need replacing, only care. In one corner, a turret rose into the 2nd floor like a watchtower, suggesting secrets tucked away in its walls. Inside, the oak floors were scarred but steadfast. Above the staircase, stained glass fractured morning light into amber and sage. It didn't just shine, it glowed as though the house was alive. Off the front hallway, I found a study with shelves climbing floor to ceiling, broken only by a fireplace and a window seat. I pictured a teacup on one side, a book resting on the other. That would be my library. The kitchen was tired. Brass knobs dulled, linoleum curling up at the corners. But structure mattered more than shine. Tile can be replaced. Soul cannot. I stood at the center of that room and closed my eyes, listening for the life it might hold. I imagined Rachel rushing through, her hands dusted in glitter, laughing. I heard Serena rolling her eyes at the oven while secretly enjoying its warmth. I saw Mark at the table, head bowed into his hands the way Philip used to, pausing to ask me to pass the salt. It wasn't real, not yet, but it was a dream I finally gave myself permission to believe in. Upstairs, the master bedroom rose tall with high ceilings and 3 east-facing windows. Light spilled across the floor in wide pools. This room would be mine. Philip always said east-facing windows were the most honest, showing you the shape of the day before you even rose from bed. I thought of him sitting with his coffee, the paper folded neatly, silent but present. I stood there now in the same light, eyes closed, and let it wash over me. That was the beginning. I chose my contractors carefully, not the ones with flashy trucks and big ads, but a small team from the historic district who understood the value of preservation. I met them only twice. Everything else passed through Lily. Every invoice, every order, every signature traveled under the name of the PSH Legacy Trust. My name appeared nowhere. If anyone searched, they'd reach only a dead end in an office downtown. That was the plan. The work took 6 weeks. In that time, I drifted between houses, still sleeping in my old bed, still answering Mark's questions with small smiles, still listening as Serena pitched independent living facilities with too much enthusiasm. They never asked what I was doing. They never suspected. I never offered. Some things grow best in silence. By the second week, the kitchen was stripped bare. The oak floors were sanded smooth and polished by hand. Every door knob, every brass hinge, every original piece was preserved. The house was being reborn, quietly, deliberately, into mine. The chandelier in the dining room still wore its years, brass wiring redone but not polished to gleam. Evelyn had insisted on that. She wanted it to glow with memory, not scrubbed of it. The fireplace tiles had been cleaned carefully, their small crack along the left edge preserved. She told the contractor, "Leave it. That crack makes it real." He'd nodded, though she could tell he didn't understand. Upstairs, she had chosen wallpaper herself. A pattern of violets so faint they almost passed for gray until the afternoon sun softened them. In her own bedroom, walls of warm cream caught the light, and linen curtains swayed as if they belonged to a quiet inn by the sea. She had resealed the windows so the glass would no longer rattle in the wind. But in the study, the built-in shelves remained untouched, waiting to be filled slowly, one book, one memory at a time. The house was coming alive in increments. Lily, her lawyer's assistant, sent photos almost daily. A brass sconce gleaming in the hall, crown molding freshly painted, the grain of wood polished to a quiet sheen. Evelyn had told no one the address. No one had keys. To her, this wasn't just a house. It was the first thing in her long life she was building purely for herself. Not out of necessity. Out of choice. That morning she had walked through the rooms, breathing in sawdust and polish, the scent of something waiting to become permanent. For the first time in years she felt the future opening like a door she could walk through. That afternoon she was at her old home, the place everyone kept reminding her was too much space for a widow alone, when the phone rang. "Hi, Mom." Mark's voice carried its usual lightness, as though he were speaking from the car with a coffee balanced in one hand. "Hello, darling," Evelyn said, softening. So Serena and I are out looking at houses today. For her parents, actually. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the phone. Oh. Is everything all right? Yeah, just being practical. Her mom's knees are worse and her dad's meds are getting complicated. They'll need more space soon. We're thinking multi-generational living might be best. He said it casually as if this were no different than running errands. He went on, there's this Victorian on Sycamore. Gorgeous place. 6 bedrooms, wide kitchen, original floors. Honestly, Mom, it reminds me of our old house. Only better. And it just came back on the market. Evelyn's chest tightened. Sycamore. Her house. The red brick Victorian she had claimed in secret. Shaped into something sacred. The place where she finally felt herself again. That sounds lovely, she managed, her voice steady. Will her parents be purchasing it? Mark gave a light laugh. Well, that's the catch. It's out of their budget. Ours too, honestly. But we thought maybe if you helped, just a little, consider it part of our future inheritance, it could really work. The words were soft, wrapped in family reason, but the expectation was clear. Evelyn pressed the phone closer, her eyes drifting to the silver teacup on the table beside her. Dust had gathered on the rim. She ran her thumb along its edge, grounding herself. How much is it listed for? She asked quietly. They're asking full price, no financing. Something about a trust holding it. Weird situation. Apparently the last buyer backed out. Evelyn nearly smiled. The last buyer hadn't backed out at all. She had walked those rooms just this morning. She had chosen the sconces, the curtains, the wallpaper. But she kept the truth sealed inside, heavy and unmoving. Well, she murmured after a pause, I suppose if it's that nice, you'll want to move quickly. Exactly, Mark said, his voice full of confidence. That's why we thought of you. I mean, it's kind of perfect. You could even move in with us. There's a guest suite right next to the master. Quiet, private, no stairs. It'd be so easy for you. He said it like an act of generosity, as if being folded into the edges of someone else's life was a gift I should be grateful for. I forced a smile into my words. Let me think about it, I told him gently. I'd love to help if it makes sense. When the call ended, I realized my hand was trembling. The kitchen was still around me, humming with silence. Slowly I pieced it together. They didn't know. They had no idea the house they were dreaming about already belonged to me. They were planning to ask me for money to buy a home I had already poured myself into. Anger might have been the natural reaction, but what I felt was softer, stranger. Like being erased with a pleasant smile, like being expected to step into a part I'd never agreed to play. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message. Serena this time. Told my mom about the house. She cried. First time I've seen her light up in months. This place could really be the start of something for all of us. I stared at her words, caught on that phrase. The start of something for all of us. The irony pressed heavy against my chest. They didn't even imagine I might be part of that all, except when it came to footing the bill. I typed a reply, then erased it. Some silences hold the truth better than words. The next morning, before dawn had fully broken, I drove to Sycamore. The neighborhood was hushed, birds just beginning to stir, mailboxes standing at quiet attention. I parked around the corner and walked, the wind tugging lightly at my coat as if urging me to reconsider. But I kept going. At the house, I avoided the front. Instead, I slipped through the side gate, easing it open until it gave a faint metallic sigh. The grass was damp beneath my shoes as I made my way to the back service door, hidden under the shadow of old hedges. I still had the small brass key. No one had asked for it. No one knew to. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the mingled scent of paint, lemon oil, and the faintest trace of aged cedar that lived in the bones of the house. I slipped off my shoes, careful not to scuff the polished wood, and moved up the narrow service stairs. They creaked just as they had 3 decades ago, when Philip would tiptoe up with a breakfast tray on Mother's Day. Halfway up I froze. Voices. Light laughter. And then Serena's bright tone, warm and eager, floating upward. And this is the dining room. Can you believe the ceiling? Original oak beams. Perfect for holidays. She spoke with the pride of discovery, as though she had uncovered something rare, something hers. I crept a little higher and reached the landing, crouching low beside the linen cabinet. From there I could see through the wrought iron railing into the foyer. Serena walked her mother through the rooms, her gestures wide and theatrical. "And look at the stained glass," she said, almost glowing. "It's like stepping into an old film. Isn't it beautiful?" Her mother, petite in a quilted coat, white sneakers squeaking softly against the floor, nodded in delight. "Oh, it's wonderful. Just wonderful. Spacious too. Such a dream." Serena smiled brightly. "The master suite will be ours. And Mom, I thought you could have the room right next door." Evelyn's hand pressed against the wall beside her. The paint was still smooth, still hers. Yet hearing Serena claim the space, the words sank into her chest like stones. "Would you like me to continue with Evelyn's choice? Whether to step into the scene and claim her truth, or retreat and keep the house a secret sanctuary?" It had the best afternoon light. The words settled into me like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward. What I felt wasn't anger, not grief either, but a deep, resonant stillness. That was my room. The room where I had once stood with the morning sun spilling across the floorboards, imagining a life I'd never allow myself to claim. I had pictured Serena cooking in the kitchen, children racing down the stairs, voices bright with laughter. I had built that dream carefully with quiet hope, not because I believed I would live it, but because I wanted them to one day feel it. Legacy wrapped in brick and light. But standing there, unseen, I watched my daughter-in-law give it away as though it were hers to bestow, a gift wrapped for someone else's future. My eyes stayed dry. I turned and slipped into the master bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. The light had begun its slow climb across the walls, golden and forgiving, stretching toward the windowsill. There, where I had left a small brass frame with Philip's picture, sunlight struck his smile. That smile had always been patient, amused, steady, even when I scorched the roast or argued with the radio. I reached out, fingers brushing the cool edge of the frame. "Do you see this, Philip?" I whispered. "Do you see how quickly they forget who built the roof they're standing under?" The room held its silence, offering no reply but the warmth of light and the faint hum of Serena's voice below, describing where she might put a coffee bar. I straightened, smoothed my hand against the wardrobe's oak panel, and left without glancing back. I took the service stairs again, the path of ghosts and caretakers, the path of invisibility. I didn't want faces, questions, or the brittle weight of forced kindness. I wanted my silence, sharp as glass, clean as truth. Outside, I paused beneath the maple that lined the drive. Its branches burned with autumn, scattering leaves like secrets onto the ground. From where I stood, I could see Serena gesturing proudly at the porch, her voice ringing with ownership. She looked so certain, so rehearsed, that I wondered if she believed her own performance. But the truth was buried deeper, inked in deeds, layered in trusts, sealed under my signature and Lily's meticulous filings. I walked away, not defeated, not diminished. Awake. That was enough. That night I couldn't sleep. I drove to the other house, the one Philip and I had built together. The one where Sunday mornings smelled like coffee and newsprint, where a clumsy hand had left stains on the kitchen tile that never quite came out. The house they had once walked through as though it were nothing more than another listing. I pulled into the drive, headlights off, the silence inside waiting for me. Not hollow, watchful. I stepped into the kitchen, flicked on a light, and the hum of the bulb rose like an old friend clearing its throat. I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I hadn't used in years. "Lily," I said when she answered. My voice was steady. "I need you here tonight." She didn't ask why. She never needed explanations. She arrived less than an hour later, windbreaker zipped, toolkit in hand. "Every lock," I told her. "Front, side, back, garage. Even the one upstairs that sticks. Replace them all. And I want cameras. Quiet ones. No one sees them but us." She studied me, brow raised. "Do you want to press charges?" I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I want to see just how far they'll go." Would you like me to continue the next part with Evelyn watching the cameras reveal how Serena and Mark behave once they believe the house is theirs? The air was taut, heavy with unspoken words. Lily said nothing, but I could see it in her expression. The quiet fury of someone who loved you enough to want to call the authorities, to shout. Yet she respected my silence the way Philip always had. While she worked on the locks and cameras, I wandered into the kitchen. I opened the third drawer from the left, still creaking as it had for decades. I found a sheet of monogrammed stationery, the same kind I'd once used for thank you notes. Picking up a pen, I began to write, not with anger, not with accusation, but with the calm honesty that comes when you no longer feel compelled to explain yourself. By the time I finished, Lily had placed the cameras. 3 inside, 2 trained on the walkways. The locks clicked into place at precisely 11:04 p.m. I sat alone at the marble island, the note resting softly before me, my hands folded in my lap as I had done in church for years. A lock turned, gentle but deliberate. It was more than metal catching. It was a boundary, a quiet declaration. The woman who had kept the lights on, the meals warm, the memories alive, was still here. Still present. Still claiming her space. My reflection caught me in the oven glass. My hair was grayer than I remembered, shoulders straighter than I expected. There was no anger in my face, only resolution. For years I had mistaken silence for kindness, disappearance for love. Tonight the locks reminded me of the truth. Presence mattered. Being here, awake, aware, belonged to me. I moved slowly up the stairs, hand resting on the banister, passing Philip's portrait in the hallway. I paused, whispering, "They think it's theirs, don't they?" I imagined his answer, soft but certain. "You still know where the deed is, don't you?" "Yes." I did. And I knew another truth. Serena hadn't merely toured the house that day. She had tried on a life that wasn't hers. Tried to fit her mother into the corner of my memories. Tried to overwrite the care and attention I had poured into every board, every beam, every corner. But houses like this have memory. The wood remembers love. It groans differently when strangers walk across it. The air shifts when care is absent. And my home had spoken. It had locked itself for me. I returned to the main floor, turned off the lights, and settled near the front window. Outside, the street slept under the sway of sycamore branches, whispering like old friends. I drew a blanket over my lap. The one Philip used to joke made me look like a watchful owl guarding her nest, and smiled. That night I didn't cry. I watched the camera feeds on my phone, the small red lights blinking above each doorway. The silence that once felt like emptiness now felt like protection. I stayed awake until the first light of dawn, because some awakenings don't arrive with alarms. They arrive in clicks and locks, in the steady assertion of your own presence. Morning came with the soft chime of my phone, emotion alert. I sat up slowly, taking a deep breath, and tapped the app. There they were, Serena and her mother standing at my front door. Dressed neatly, carrying the posture of expectation, pride flickering in their eyes. Serena tried the key once, then again, her brows knitting in confusion. Her mother clutched a takeaway coffee, glancing around like this was a home she was meant to inherit. But it wasn't. Not today. Not ever. Serena turned to her mother and muttered something, too faint for the camera to capture, then tried the key again. Jiggle, push, pull. Nothing. I sipped water from the glass on my nightstand, unmoving, unblinking. She pulled out her phone, frustration etching her face. Her mother's lips pressed together, eyes darting, asking questions without words. Serena nodded, then dialed and put the phone to her ear. Not long after, my phone buzzed. Mark. I answered. Mom. His voice was tight, uneasy. Something's wrong. Serena just got to the Sycamore house and the key isn't working. Someone must have changed the locks. Maybe squatters. We're thinking of calling the police. The quiet in my room was thick. I waited a beat, then two, before asking, "Let me ask you something, Mark." Yeah. Why does your wife have a key to a house you said wasn't even finalized? Silence. Dense, heavy. I could almost hear his thoughts tumbling, scrambling for an explanation. I thought we were just looking at that house for Serena's mom. That it wasn't final. Maybe needed a deposit. Another pause. That dream involved you giving someone else a key to my house? A sharp exhale. You're saying that's your house? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Wait, you mean you own it? Still no answer. Then a small, incredulous whisper. You bought that house? Softly I said, I've always owned it, Mark. Bought it quietly with your father's life insurance after he passed. It was meant to be my private place for spring. You helped me look at it. I didn't know you closed on it, he stammered. I thought you didn't go through with it. I didn't need to explain my finances. Silence said enough. Then came the defensive, wounded tone I knew well. Mom, you could have told us. We wouldn't have done anything if we'd known. You walked them in without permission. In the background, I could hear Serena, sharp and impatient, trying to smooth things over. It's a misunderstanding, Mark muttered. Of course she said that. I hung up. No words needed. Let the silence finish what I had started. I leaned back into the pillow, exhaled slowly. My fingers brushed the tablet, still paused on the camera feed. Serena standing at the door, trying to maintain control, while her mother's frustration was plain. I watched them pace, consult each other, call someone else who could do nothing to change the truth. My truth. My foundation. The quiet house I had built with care, patience, and love. Their assumptions, their entitlement, crumbled softly in the stillness. Justice didn't need courtrooms or yelling. It arrived in the simple click of a lock that refused to turn. I rose, barefoot on the warm wooden floors, and walked into the kitchen. I made coffee slowly, black, just the way Philip had always taken it. The house was mine. And for the first time in years, so was I. On the fridge, a photo of the three of us still clung to a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Me, Mark, and Serena, all smiles after their engagement celebration. I studied it carefully. The curve of my son's grin, the brightness in her eyes, the way she gripped his hand a little too tightly. Back then I ignored the subtle signs. I wanted so desperately to believe she was genuine, that she truly saw him, not just what he could provide. But love doesn't always blind you. It sometimes blinds you willingly. Now I chose to see. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth anchor me. Outside, the morning birds had started their chorus. Somewhere across town, two women stood at a door they believed they could claim, discovering that the lock no longer obeyed them. A quiet triumph, one turn of a key at a time. That afternoon Mark arrived alone. I was already on the porch, a pitcher of sweet tea beside two empty glasses. "No, Serena, good." I took that as a silent truce. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, waiting for a cue I didn't intend to give. After a long pause, he finally sat across from me, taking the glass I offered. "Mom," he said, his voice tentative, careful. "I need to talk." "Just me." I said nothing. I let the stillness stretch, listening to the ice clink in his glass. He inhaled, then continued. "We were planning to ask if you could help with the house, the down payment. We didn't mean for it to look the way it did." "Look the way it did?" I asked evenly, tilting my head. He avoided my gaze. "Serena got excited. She's been dreaming about that neighborhood for years." I should have stopped her. I walked over to the hallway console and grabbed the iPad charging there. I unlocked it and pulled up the footage. "Mark," I said softly, "she wasn't dreaming. She was planning." I angled the screen toward him. The video showed Serena and her mother fumbling with keys at the front door, followed by earlier footage of Serena guiding a woman in a beige blazer through the house, laughing, pointing at walls, suggesting furniture placement, acting like it was hers. Mark's eyes widened. I didn't know she brought anyone in. Mom, I swear I thought we were just looking." I let the video play one more loop, then locked it and set it face down on the table. "I have one question," I said, calm but firm. "Where did she get the key?" His jaw tightened and he looked down at the wood grain of the table. Silence stretched between us, heavy and tense. That familiar guilt returned, the same one he used to wear when he stole cookies before dinner or broke a window with a ball. But this one was larger, adult-sized, with no easy fix. "You told me you didn't even know which house she liked," I continued. "She already had the key. She brought people inside. She told them she and her mother would be living there." He still said nothing. The only sounds were wind rustling the trees and a car door slamming somewhere down the block. "I don't know what to say," Mark finally admitted, eyes still downcast. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, watching his surprise at my calmness. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't angry. Just clear. "You don't owe me an explanation," I said. But I needed to see how far this had gone before I decide what kind of mother I want to be from here on. He blinked, swallowing the weight of my words. "What does that mean?" I asked, standing and gathering the glasses from the table. "It means," I said firmly, "that I am not here to be a placeholder, a backup, or some surprise cameo in someone else's plans." Mark rose as well, his expression softening, maybe realizing this wasn't a conversation that would end neatly. "Mom, we just wanted to take care of you," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "We thought it might be easier if we could help. Keep you close." I stopped in the doorway and turned, letting my words land gently but firmly. "You wanted me close enough to watch Mark, not close enough to belong." He flinched. I didn't move to soften it. Perhaps it was harsh, perhaps not, but it was the truth I needed him to hear. His hands slipped into his pockets, shoulders hunched. "Do you want me to come by tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, letting it hang. He froze, startled. "Then, when?" "When you're ready to tell me the whole truth," I said softly, holding the door open. "Not before." He nodded once, more to himself than me, and walked down the steps past the hydrangeas we had planted together, back to the car I had once bought him in college. No apology, and none was required. Silence had said more than words ever could. The kettle clicked behind me, but I didn't move. My fingers rested around the handle of my silver teacup, steady and unshaken. Lily was across the kitchen island, her brow furrowed, fingers moving swiftly over her phone as if defusing a delicate situation. She paused, quiet for nearly a full minute. Something serious was unfolding. Finally she looked up. "I found something," she said, her tone even, careful, the same neutral authority Philip had always carried when delivering hard news. "About what?" I asked. "Serena," Lily said. "I looked into property transfers under her name, and she's done this before." I didn't flinch, just gave her a nod. "Go on." Lily held out her phone. 5 years ago, Serena's grandmother, Ethel Deacon, lived in Minnesota. Serena, the only grandchild, convinced her grandmother to transfer the deed while Ethel was still alive. Lily continued. "She framed it as a tax strategy, said it was urgent, but Ethel wasn't ill. There was no rush." I scrolled through the scanned deed, time-stamped 3 months before Ethel's passing. "And then?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She sold the property within a year," Lily said quietly, "and used it as a down payment on her first house. Mark told me she helped them get on their feet, but he never mentioned how." I let my fingers brush the rim of my teacup, cool and heavy. "She framed it as smart," Lily continued, voice lower. "Told people it was mutual. But neighbors noted her grandmother seemed confused in her last months, wondering who was living in her home. Thought it was still hers." I looked out the window. Gray clouds stretched across the horizon, low and heavy like smudged charcoal. Yet my roses bloomed in defiance. Soft, stubborn, resilient, thriving even when neglected. "Why didn't Mark tell me?" I murmured, mostly to myself. "Probably because he didn't know," Lily said, sitting back, voice quiet. "Serena has a way of making all of it sound like a kindness. But it's a pattern. She targets women who live alone." I watched the steam rise from the untouched tea, letting its warmth and faint scent anchor me. My fingers curled around the silver teacup, feeling the familiar weight. "She studied her grandmother's weakness," I said softly, "and she learned from it." Lily nodded, slow and deliberate. "If I hadn't changed the locks, or if I'd still been in Charleston," she let the thought trail off. "I didn't need her to finish it, and she didn't." The quiet between us felt heavy but steady, like standing on the edge of a wide river and letting the current speak for itself. "Do you think she planned all of this from the start?" I asked, eyes tracing the pale morning light spilling across the counter. Lily hesitated. "I think she saw an opening and seized it." I exhaled softly, a sound somewhere between release and resignation. "I remember the first time she walked through this house," I murmured. "She looked as if it already belonged to her, not me." "She misjudged you," Lily said quietly. "No," I replied, letting my voice hold the weight of certainty. "She misjudged my silence." I moved to the window, hand resting lightly on the sill. Outside, the garden was still, the rose bushes I'd tended for decades standing quietly in the soft light. She thought a few compliments and some pretended affection would be enough to make me relinquish what I'd built. She thought I could be sweet-talked out of my own legacy. Lily's voice came gentle from behind me. "Are you all right?" "I'm not hurt," I said, turning slightly so the morning light touched my face. "I'm awake." And it was true. Clarity had settled over me like the slow certainty of sunrise. I saw the gaps, the missteps, the hidden motives. She assumed I wouldn't notice the missing key. She assumed I wouldn't question the rushed papers. She assumed I'd be too polite, too grateful to resist her plan. I lifted the teacup, letting the warmth trail down my throat as I drank slowly, savoring each detail of the room, the garden, the world outside. Lily's expression softened, a small, proud smile forming as she understood without words. "She's clever," I said quietly, placing the cup back on the saucer with precision. "But clever isn't wisdom." I whispered to myself, almost inaudible. If I hadn't been clear this time, I would have been next. There was no anger, only the firm recognition of truth. Outside, the rain began, gentle drops tapping against the glass like punctuation on a sentence I had finally written in my own voice. Morning sunlight filtered through, illuminating the kitchen floor and the china I had not used in years. My mother's delicate ivory porcelain, the blue roses curling across the edges. Somehow today felt like the right day. Miriam arrived promptly, steady and bright despite her 72 years. She wore her lipstick, a small defiance of age, and carried a cane in one hand, a tin of scones in the other. "Cranberry," she said with a smile. "Figured it would go well with that smug British blend you favor." I laughed softly. "You're not wrong." We settled into the breakfast nook, sunlight brushing the lavender finally in bloom outside. A small comfort in a season that had been otherwise unkind. Miriam stirred her tea with measured care and then gently she said, "I saw the couple who came by earlier. Mark and Serena." I didn't answer right away, watching a sparrow land briefly on the windowsill before darting away. The quiet stretched, unbroken, until she placed her spoon down, waiting for me to speak. "It's strange," Miriam said, "how family can feel like sanctuary one moment and like a cage the next." I turned to her, seeing the quiet steadiness in her eyes. She wasn't just talking, she was remembering. "I lost my home 5 years ago," she said softly. "Technically it was sold. But let's not sugarcoat it. My daughter forged my signature while I was bedridden with pneumonia. Said it was to simplify things. Next thing I knew, I had a court summons in one hand and a suitcase in the other." I blinked. "I never knew that." "Most people don't," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly as she reached for her cup. "People get uneasy when older women speak plainly. I left with almost nothing, a purse and a scarf I'd knitted that winter. But the part that hurt most? It wasn't the house. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing I'd raised someone who could look me in the eye and call that justice." I reached across the table, touching her wrist to steady it. "I'm so sorry, Miriam." She shook her head. "Don't be." I cried for months. Then one morning I woke up in that tiny apartment and felt free. "Free," I echoed. "Yes," she said, her voice growing lighter. "Free from expectations. Free from proving my worth. Free from carrying the invisible debt of motherhood." Her words sank into me like sunlight through fog. I admitted softly, "I thought forgiving them would bring me peace. But it never did." "Forgiveness isn't the same as going back," Miriam said. "You can release the pain without inviting it back inside." I never spoke to my daughter again. But I forgave her. I didn't want to carry her darkness in my bones. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. We fell silent, letting the stillness settle between us, the shadows moving across the garden walls. Miriam added, I used to think growing old meant fading into the background. Now I know it means becoming clear. Clear? I asked. Clear about who you are, about who deserves to sit across from you, about what kind of peace is worth holding on to. I smiled faintly. That sounds like wisdom. Survival, she corrected with a wink. I refilled her tea, the morning sun warming the counter. My eyes drifted to the small tin where I kept my extra house keys. Locked. Safe. Thank you for coming today, I said. It means more than you know. Evelyn, she said gently, you've spent your life showing up for everyone else. Sometimes, it's okay to let someone show up for you. I nodded, understanding. Some days, it felt like standing alone in an empty theater, applauding a performance that had long ended. But perhaps it wasn't about the applause at all. It was about leaving the stage with your head held high, even if no one noticed. As Miriam rose, she paused at the door. If they come back, she said, don't open it. You don't owe anyone an explanation. I know, I whispered. She smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. And if you ever forget, I live 2 doors down. Tea stories and a freshly written will. My neighbor gets my scones if I go first. I laughed, a full, surprised laugh that rang through the quiet house. And for the first time in years, the walls felt expansive, not confining, as if the weight of unspoken truths had finally lifted. The envelope felt familiar in my hands. Soft pink with tiny hand-drawn flowers curling along the edges and a little smiling cupcake sticker holding it closed. It had slipped in among the usual stack of mail, property tax notice, a flyer for roof repair, and almost gone unnoticed. But the handwriting caught me. Not Carrara's elegant loops, not Mark's rushed scrawl, but the uneven, careful letters of a child writing to her grandmother. I sank onto the bench by the front window, the rain tapping steadily against the glass. Slowly I opened the flap. Inside, a folded sheet decorated with stickers and faint smudges of jelly bore a message in a mix of upper and lowercase letters. Dear Grandma, I miss your muffins. Mommy cries a lot, but I still love you. Love, Rachel. The first lines were guided by Kara, I could tell, but the final love, Rachel, written in thick marker, belonged entirely to her. I didn't cry. Not this time. I pressed the letter between my palms, folding it gently like a small prayer, and let the quiet ache in my chest settle into something less sharp, more like a scar softened by time and rain. I stood and went to the kitchen, reaching up to the tall cabinet I hadn't opened in months. Behind chipped casserole dishes and my mother's worn teacup lay a small box of handwritten recipe cards. Some were curled and stained, but one caught my eye, pale yellow, tiny hearts drawn around the title. Grandma Alma's Blueberry Muffins. I traced my finger over the card. Simple ingredients: flour, sugar, vanilla, blueberries picked fresh from the garden. But it wasn't the ingredients that mattered. It was the rhythm of our kitchen. Humming while stirring, Rachel perched on the counter, feet swinging, licking the spoon, testing the first muffin straight from the oven, giggles rising with the steam. That evening I wrote back on a soft blue note card, plain but meaningful. My pen moved slowly, carefully, as if the words themselves needed time to settle. Dear Rachel, I miss our baking days too. Love is a lot like muffins. Sometimes it needs the right timing, the right warmth, and a little sweetness. I've included the recipe. You'll make them even better than I ever did. Love, Grandma Alma. I tucked the pale yellow recipe card into the envelope, along with a tiny muffin-shaped eraser I had found in my drawer, leftover from Christmas. No mention of Kara. No questions, no bitterness. This wasn't about her. It was about Rachel and perhaps in a way about me, remembering who I was before all the battles, before the claims and disputes. A woman who baked, sang while gardening, and didn't need to prove her worth to anyone. The next morning I walked the envelope to the post office myself. The rain had cleared and the autumn leaves tumbled in the wind like confetti. The world felt soft, gentle, as if wrapped in a quilt. The postmaster looked at me and smiled. "Sending something sweet today, Alma?" I returned the smile, holding the envelope carefully. "Something gentle," I said. Back home, I set the kettle to boil and settled by the window once more. The recipe tin remained open on the counter, quiet and waiting. I hadn't touched it in months, but now perhaps it was time to start again. Not for Rachel, not for Kara, but for me. I reached for a second card, this one marked for cinnamon scones, and set it beside the muffin recipe. The faint scent of nutmeg lingered in the air, though I hadn't used any. Perhaps memory had its own fragrance. Forgiveness didn't need fanfare. Sometimes it was just a folded recipe card sent to a little girl who still remembered sweetness when the world felt bitter. Sometimes healing began with letting go of the urge to fix every wrong. I didn't know if Rachel would ever bake those muffins or if Kara would allow it. What I did know was that love, once planted, had a way of blooming in quiet, unexpected corners. In a kitchen unused for months. In a heart that had learned softness without fracture. In a crayon and sticker note that simply read, "I miss your muffins." So I wrote back, not to reclaim what was lost, but to remind you and maybe myself that love doesn't need a house to live in. It only needs a warm oven and an open heart, both of which still belong to me. 3 days later my phone rang. Kara's voice, unusually subdued, cut through the hum of the morning. "Evelyn," she began, skipping greetings. "Can we talk? In person?" I hesitated, not out of fear, but because I'd finally learned that boundaries weren't built from feelings. They were enforced with clarity. "I'm home this afternoon," I said. "If you come, we'll speak here. The porch camera stays on. I won't be alone in the house." There was a pause. "Hey, I understand." By 3 o'clock she arrived. She looked different. Less polished, no full makeup, just tired eyes and a purse strap clenched between both hands. I led her to the kitchen, poured her tea and sat opposite her. I didn't speak first. She did. "I know how this looks," she said, her voice trembling. "But I swear I wasn't trying to take advantage of you." I let her continue. "Mark and I thought this house could be a reset. Something solid for Rachel. I grew up with nothing, Evelyn, and I promised myself she wouldn't know that. So I rushed things. I put the house in my name early, thought it would simplify taxes, thought you'd understand." My silence stretched. "I wasn't trying to cheat you," she added, voice tightening, defensive. "I was trying to help this family." I met her gaze evenly. "No," I said softly. "You weren't trying. You were calculating." Her lips parted, ready to interrupt, but I continued. "I've spent my life listening to people's intentions while watching their actions. You say you were helping, but you forged documents, pressured my son to push me into a trust one didn't need, and filed paperwork behind my back. That isn't help, Kara. That's strategy." Her eyes shimmered as if a truth had struck her. "I bought this home," I said gently, "as a gift, not just for me but for a family that still believes in things like integrity, honesty and roots. But a gift cannot be given to someone who sees me as a wallet to be accessed at will. Kara flinched. I know you feel you've had it hard, I added, softening but firm. But that doesn't justify using others as stepping stones. Her voice wavered. I didn't raise a hand to silence her, only to pause the chaos. This isn't about meaning. It's about behavior. I rose, went to the kitchen drawer and retrieved a folder. Inside, a high-resolution printout lay neatly time-stamped and dated, showing her at the lawyer's office. The very one she'd insisted she never visited. Kara stared at the printout, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of it had pressed the air out of the room. I placed the folder gently in front of her. No threats, I said evenly. No lawyers, no police. Not unless I'm left with no choice. This is your chance to make it right. Her hands shook as they hovered over the folder, reluctant to open it. I added softly, and one more thing. I'm not the one who needs saving. Her eyes lifted, curious and uncertain. You looked at me like I was a weak old woman, too emotional, too fragile to see clearly, I continued. But I've raised a son, buried my husband, faced illness, endured winters that would outlast your birthdays. I don't need rescuing, Kara. I needed respect. She pressed her hands to her face, her breath catching in uneven sobs. I didn't know how to stop, she whispered. This is your chance, I said, standing and signaling the end of our conversation. Kara rose as well, unsteady, clutching the folder as if it might scorch her fingers. At the doorway she paused. I'm sorry, she said, her voice no longer performance but confession. I didn't respond. I knew real apologies weren't measured in words. They were measured in actions, and only time would reveal them. She stepped out onto the porch. The soft click of the camera echoed as the door shut behind her. I returned to the kitchen, lifted my tea still warm, and sat back down. Outside, the late sun stretched long shadows across the yard. My hands were steady. My heart calm. For the first time in years I felt centered, not angry, not triumphant, just whole. That, I realized, was stronger than revenge. It was healing. Evening arrived quietly. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, no grandchildren tugging at my sleeve. Just me alone in the kitchen, tying the old apron around my waist, the one embroidered with faded letters, "Stir with love." The silence felt full, not empty. I had prepared a simple meal: roast chicken with rosemary, roasted root vegetables from the farmer's market, and a basket of muffins, the ones Rachel loved. At precisely 6, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands and opened it to find Miriam standing there, silver hair curled softly, wearing a floral blouse that carried the promise of spring. You look lovely, I said sincerely. So do you? Smells like home in there, she replied, smiling warmly. I stepped aside to let her in. Behind her, Anna and Jamal, the young couple who had just moved into the duplex across the street, arrived, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and a loaf of homemade cornbread. And this, Anna added shyly, holding out a small wrapped package, for the neighbor who welcomed us with tea and gardening tips before we even unpacked. I laughed. I couldn't let you plant your azaleas in that heavy clay soil. Soon after, little Elsie appeared, an 11-year-old paper carrier who had once helped me carry groceries up the porch steps when my wrist was sore. She brought a chocolate pie, humble in appearance but generous in intent. My table was full. I arranged the dishes, poured the cider, and lit 2 candles, not for romance but for reverence. We held hands briefly before the meal. Though no prayer was spoken aloud, there was a sacredness in the silence. a recognition of connection, of home, and of a life quietly lived with love. The dishes moved from hand to hand, warm and fragrant. We laughed over burnt casseroles, shared stories of garden misadventures, discussed book clubs and neighborhood projects. Jamal offered to help fix the sagging back gate. Miriam promised to bring her rhubarb pie next time. No one asked about my son. No one mentioned Kara. And yet their absence was quietly felt, like a soft shadow at the edge of the room. Midway through the meal, I paused and looked around the table. The candlelight danced on glasses, reflected in kind eyes and tired but open smiles. They weren't my blood, yet they had come. Not out of obligation, but because they wanted to be there. I set down my fork, took a measured sip of water, and finally spoke. "You know," I began, voice calm but deliberate, "I used to believe family was something permanent, stamped into you like a birth certificate or a last name. Lately, I've come to see it differently. Family isn't always who shares your name, it's who shares your table." They looked up quietly, and I saw the understanding flicker in their faces. Miriam's eyes glimmered with recognition, Anna's softened with gratitude, Jamal's held steady respect, and Elsie's showed shy pride. I didn't need applause. I didn't need acknowledgement. This moment itself was enough. A warmth had filled the spaces that once echoed with betrayal. Miriam reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're right, Alma. Sometimes family is who knocks on your door even when they're not invited, just to check if you're okay." I smiled and handed her a muffin. "I made these with real butter this time." "Oh, then I'll take two," she said, laughing. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the pie served, slightly underdone but sweet, we moved into the living room. I placed a record on the old turntable Mark had once tried to convince me to discard. The soft crackle was oddly comforting. Elsie curled up on the rug with a crossword, Anna and Jamal shared stories of their first date, and Miriam leaned back on the couch, eyes closed, murmuring that she hadn't felt this relaxed in years. I settled into my armchair, the one with the creaking cushion overlooking my rose bushes, and let it all sink in. No fine china, no designer dresses, no speeches about legacy or obligations. Just a simple dinner. Yet it felt like a beginning, not of a family in the traditional sense, but of something more deliberate. A chosen circle, a community built from care and presence rather than blood. As they began to leave, I handed each of them a small gift bag. A jar of homemade jam and a note that read, "Thank you for being here, for listening, for showing up. You reminded me tonight that home isn't a place. It's a feeling, and you helped bring it back to life." When the door finally closed and silence returned to the house, I didn't feel lonely. I felt full. And in that fullness I whispered softly, This is enough." A week later, the final paperwork arrived. No fanfare, no confrontation, just a plain envelope and an email from my lawyer. "Alma, as of today, Kara has been fully removed from any legal claims, powers of attorney, or estate negotiation rights. Mark has not contested. It is concluded. No fireworks, no apologies, just quiet. Silence can be a gift, I realized." I stared at the message, then exhaled a long breath that felt as though it had been held beneath my ribs for years. Later that afternoon, the mail slot creaked. It wasn't bills this time. A small envelope had slipped through, edges smudged and clearly handwritten. I picked it up, curiosity rising, and felt the faint stir of something gentle yet unshakable, the quiet return of connection. I recognized the handwriting instantly. I sank into my chair with my tea and carefully unfolded the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a warm, inviting house with tall windows and gardens brimming with flowers. On the porch stood a figure with silver hair and a gentle smile. Beneath it, in uneven purple crayon, were 6 letters. Grandma's home. My chest tightened. I set the card on the counter and let my eyes roam over the kitchen. The stained glass Mark had once pointed out, the creaking cabinets that bore decades of use, the layers of memory embedded in every corner. Kara had wanted to replace it all, to erase what I had nurtured and preserved. But this simple drawing reminded me of what truly belonged to me. I found a small brass tack in the drawer, walked to the archway leading into the living room, and pressed Rachel's drawing above it. No frame, no glass. Just honest crayon joy catching the afternoon light. It felt like a declaration, quiet but certain. The next morning was unusually serene. I rose early not because I had to, but because sunlight spilled through the colored panes, scattering soft blues and ambers across the hardwood floor. I brewed a fresh pot of Earl Grey in my old ceramic teapot, the one Kara had once called tacky, and smiled at its familiar warmth. The roses outside needed watering. I carried my cup to the porch, slippers brushing the stone steps, moving slowly through the garden I had planted 33 years ago with Philip. The roots ran deep, steady, unshaken. As I knelt to tend a drooping bloom, the morning birds sang their usual melody, now completely at ease with my presence. I wasn't a visitor here. I was home. Reclaiming a place that was always yours feels strange. It isn't about ownership. It's about peace, about feeling the walls breathe with you instead of around you. A breeze carried a single petal onto my wrist, light and delicate. I realized I didn't need anyone to tell me I was whole. I had always been. Even when they treated me as a caretaker, a banker, a convenience, I had endured. I had survived. And now I was exactly where I needed to be. I sipped my tea, letting its warmth linger, while Rachel's card swayed slightly in the breeze from the open window. The stained glass above threw tiny rainbows across the wall. Quiet, accidental beauty. I didn't need ceremonies or closure. What I had was enough. The voice inside me, patient and steady, whispered what I had known all along. They walked through my home as if I didn't exist. But I did. And now I lived here fully, not in their shadows but in my own life. The phone rang while I steeped chamomile tea. I almost ignored it. Lately I shouted more than I spoke. But something nudged me forward. Intuition, curiosity, or perhaps just a stubborn readiness. I set the kettle down, wiped my hands, and lifted the cordless phone. Mark. My voice sounded careful. "Hi, Mom," he said, quieter than I remembered. Hesitant. "Rebecca's ultrasound is next Thursday." Pause. "Then, we thought maybe, if you wanted, you could come." No apologies. No acknowledgement of the months of silence, the house, the manipulations, the bruised dignity. Just a simple, ordinary invitation. My body froze. I stood by the counter, holding the phone like it might erupt at any moment, my heart learning to balance hope and caution at once. Because wasn't it complicated? Every option felt loaded. Grief, guilt, the old ache of being a mother left unacknowledged. I stayed silent. Absolutely silent. Mark tried to fill the emptiness with a fragile attempt. "I thought you might want to come, first grandchild and all." That word, grandchild, pierced me sharp and soft at once, like a thorn pressed against silk. Rachel's crayon drawing still hung near the window. Grandma's home. And now this, the offer to be present for a new life entering the world, as if showing up could smooth over months of absence, of disregard. I didn't respond. I told him I'd check my schedule and hung up before I could betray the swirl of feelings in my chest. I remained still. The kettle had long stopped whistling. My tea sat cold. I walked to the cupboard, carefully returning my favorite silver-trimmed teacup to its place. It made a soft, hollow clink, a punctuation mark for a thought left unresolved. What was I supposed to feel? Joy? Anticipation? Resentment? All of it spun together like cream swirling in coffee, neither fully blending nor separating. I wanted to go, I admitted to myself. I wanted to see the faint, blurry outline of that new life on a black and white screen. I wanted to offer Rebecca quiet support, the kind only a woman who has known equal measures of pain and love could give. I wanted to ask questions she wouldn't think of, to be a mother again in some small, tangible way. But I was also a woman. A woman who had been dismissed, overlooked, and dismissed again. A woman who had rebuilt her life not because they changed, but because she had found her own footing. A woman who had learned to protect her peace with carefully drawn boundaries. Could I enter that room and not feel like a prop, a placeholder in their story of redemption? Would they love me, or would they merely need a grandmother-shaped figure to complete a narrative they were rewriting? Was I destined to be a background character in their conscience? The conflict inside me broke open sharply. I am a mother, I whispered, staring at the empty counter. But I am also a person. A person with a backbone, with memories, with scars. It's impossible to explain to someone who has never had to split herself in two, never had to balance love and dignity like holding two glowing coals at once. You try not to drop either. But sometimes one must rest. And in that moment I realized, if I went I'd have to pretend. Pretend the house I lived in hadn't been turned into a display for Carrara's ambitions. Pretend I wasn't called difficult for speaking my mind. Pretend the nights I cried alone, while the people I gave life to doubted my worth, never happened. Pretending, that's the part nobody warns you about. Not the hurt. Not the loss. It's the performance that weighs heaviest. I sat by the window watching morning light stretch across the rosebush. Overnight, a new bloom had opened, soft pink, edges curled like a letter long forgotten. I had planted it weeks ago, never expecting it to flourish. Yet there it was, vibrant and unrepentant. Could I go? Yes. Should I? That was the question demanding an answer. I thought of Rachel's last letter, her drawing, the careful way she misspelled miss with a single S, and the little heart over the I. That child didn't know betrayal. That child only knew love. And perhaps I realized that was enough reason to show up. Not for them, not for Mark or Serena, but for Rachel, and maybe for the part of myself that still remembered how to bloom. Not yet. Maybe one day she would. And when that day came, what would I tell her? Should I teach her to always show up, even when her name had been quietly erased from the invitations? Or should I tell her that love doesn't demand losing yourself? By nightfall, I still hadn't decided, but one truth had settled in my chest. I would not let anyone guilt me into affection again. Perhaps that was the lesson all along. True motherhood didn't mean sacrificing yourself. It meant safeguarding the person you had become so your children could one day learn to protect their own hearts. Sometimes preserving your humanity calls for quiet rebellion. Not a shout, not a slammed door. Just a calm act. Putting away a teacup and knowing you no longer owe anyone a performance. I was searching for a warranty. A small, ordinary thing. The one for the stained glass lamp in the front hall flickering again. Despite all my progress, I was still the kind of woman who kept things just in case. I opened the hallway cabinet I hadn't touched since Philip passed. The faint scent of his aftershave lingered, that crisp, familiar smell that always made me glance over my shoulder, half expecting him to be there. I rifled through the files carefully. Receipts, deeds, birth certificates. Then my fingers found something different. Not smooth office paper, but thick, cream-colored stationery folded once without an envelope. My heart skipped. The handwriting was unmistakable. Philip's. Sharp, elegant loops, the kind of care he always put into each capital letter of my name. Evelyn. To Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there. It began. I froze. My body still, every bone feeling stretched in different directions. I sank to the cool tile floor, holding the letter as if it might shatter, and began to read. Evelyn, if this has found its way to you, then I have left too much unsaid. You have always carried the weight of what I could not speak aloud. And I fear I left you alone with it too long. This house, this life, none of it would have meant anything without you. I watched you become a home for everyone else, and I hated that I let you shrink yourself to hold the rest of us. Not because you were weak, but because you were too strong, too generous. I paused. A tear fell onto the page, smudging the word generous into a soft blur. You spent years thinking love required absence, that silence was noble, that sacrifice was invisible glue. But Evelyn, you were never meant to vanish inside your giving. If you are reading this, I ask only one thing. Stop being the background. Live vividly. Paint the walls if it pleases you. Bake for yourself, travel alone, eat the last treat without hesitation. Lock the doors if you wish. Sit by the fire without worrying if someone else deserves the seat more. You do not need to prove your love through disappearance. You do not need to earn a place at the table. You built it. And finally, know this, you were always the house. You are the house. People may change, walls may crumble, but you remain. Live for no one else but yourself. With all I ever was and all I ever loved. Philip. I didn't notice when the room went dark. I didn't notice the clock ticking. All I knew was the letter in my hands, the quiet truth in Philip's words, and the realization that at last I could live fully for myself. I stayed on the floor long after I finished reading. The letter had softened in my hands, edges damp from the warmth of my palms. I pressed it against my chest and closed my eyes. I could almost hear Philip's voice, that low hum he used when he wanted to be heard, when words mattered more than sound. I realized how many years I had spent as if I owed someone my absence, how often I had drifted through meals like a shadow, entered rooms on tiptoe. I thought of Mark and Rebecca, their carefully measured concern, their convenient phone calls, the way I had always felt like an extra chair in a crowded room, shifted to suit others' needs. I had told myself it was normal. Motherhood meant sacrifice, aging meant shrinking, but Philip had seen me. Not just the young, radiant Evelyn, but the one who persisted quietly, faithfully. And he had left me the permission I never dared ask for. I rose slowly, cradling the letter. I didn't put it back in the drawer. I carried it to the glass cabinet in the living room and tucked it behind the small figurine Philip had brought from Florence. The one he said reminded him of me. Proud posture, thoughtful eyes. I let myself smile. Not because I was healed, but because for the first time in a long while I wasn't pretending. I wasn't minimizing my desires or erasing my grief to ease someone else's conscience. I had every right to occupy this house, this skin, this life. I was no longer someone else's foundation. I was the home. I brewed chamomile tea when the phone rang again. It wasn't Mark this time, it was the hospital. Miriam had suffered a minor stroke. She was stable, they said, but frightened, alone, asking for me. I stood frozen a moment, staring at the kettle's steam curling toward the sunlight. Then I turned it off and grabbed my coat. At the hospital, the familiar scent of antiseptic mingled with fatigue and quiet worry. I found Miriam in a small room, pale walls, a single orchid drooping near the sink. Her face was drawn, lips faintly colored, but her eyes still burned with that familiar spark. "You came," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Of course," I said, easing into the chair beside her. "We may bicker like estranged family, but we still bake the same pie crust." She allowed a faint smile. We sat in silence for a while. Her fingers were cold when she reached for my hand. "I thought I'd have more time," she murmured. "I always believed the next chapter would come once the last one was neatly closed. I waited for the moment to forgive myself. But it never comes. You have to choose it even before it's earned." The steady beep of the monitor punctuated her words like slow reminders of fragility. "I lived longer than your brother," she said softly. "But I didn't truly live until I left the house we built together." I swallowed hard. There was no cleverness, no show, just a woman in a hospital gown, stripped of pretense, speaking raw truth. "I watched you, Evelyn," she continued. "Always bending, always giving, always trying to fix what was never yours to repair. You stayed longer than I ever could." I didn't know what to say. I squeezed her hand instead. She blinked slowly, her gaze steady. "Don't wait like I did," Miriam whispered. "Don't hope they'll invite you back into a room that was never meant for you. The permission you're looking for, to live, to rest, to be, it doesn't come from them." Her voice grew raspier with each word. "It has to come from you." I nodded, too full for words. That night, I lingered by the bedroom window long after the house had fallen silent. The wind carried the first sharp hint of winter, brushing the rose stems outside with quiet gentleness. I lit a candle and then opened the old trunk Philip had left me, the one I hadn't dared touch in months. On top lay a worn manila folder. I had found one letter in there before, but this time I dug deeper and uncovered my own envelope and pen. I sat at the edge of the bed and wrote, not to Miriam, not to Mark, not to Rachel or anyone else I had tried so hard to protect. This time I wrote to the future and to myself. In the weeks that followed, I rewrote my will. The new version was concise, deliberate. If Mark and Kara could demonstrate consistent, meaningful actions of restored trust, real, tangible effort, not just pretty words, then a portion of the estate would be available to them. Otherwise, everything would remain in a charitable trust for Rachel when she turned 25. It wasn't revenge nor punishment. It was protection of what mattered, of what deserved to last. I locked the new documents in the drawer and exhaled. Miriam was discharged a few days later. Her movements were slower, but there was a softness to her gait, not weakness, but the calm that comes when you stop apologizing for simply existing. One afternoon she arrived wearing a knitted cap and carrying a small box of cinnamon scones. "I thought you'd like these," she said, placing them carefully on the counter. "And I wanted to see the house again, now that it finally feels like yours." We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea beneath the golden light cast by the stained glass. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn," she murmured. I smiled. "I think I'm finally proud of myself too." We didn't speak of Mark or Kara or the old shadows that once haunted these rooms. We simply shared scones, two women navigating different maps of the same life, both marked by choices, but neither trapped by their weight. It was Tuesday when Mark called. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of his practiced warmth. "Mom, would you meet me for coffee?" I paused. "Is Kara coming?" "No. Just me." I agreed, unsure whether it was curiosity, hope, or something else entirely. I chose my navy cardigan, the one Miriam had once said brought out the blue in my eyes. My hands shook as I buttoned it. The cafe was on the corner of Main and Chestnut, the same spot Mark had taken me after church when he was 13, back when he still believed I hung the moon. I arrived early as always and picked a seat by the window. Sunlight poured in, casting golden streaks across dust motes in the air. I ordered chamomile tea. Mark arrived 7 minutes late, but it didn't bother me. He looked tired, carrying the weight of too much and pretending otherwise. His shirt was crisp, but his eyes were frayed. He sat across from me. No hug, just a hesitant, "Thanks for coming." I nodded. Silence stretched between us, so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the porcelain cup I held. Finally he spoke. We've been talking, Car and I, about therapy, about how we handled things, about how I spoke to you. I read Dad's letter too. The letter you found. I didn't know he had written that. My chest tightened as I read again. I think he was right. You deserve more than we ever gave you. You always have. Mark looked at me then, searching my face like it held some hidden key, some path to forgiveness. I stayed still, saying nothing. If we change, he whispered, if we go to therapy, if we do better, would you come back? The question landed between us like a stone dropping into a still pond. I didn't answer. I let the steam from my tea curl into my eyes, traced the tiny flecks of chamomile floating in amber liquid. I thought of all the years I'd spent apologizing through action, all the ways I'd tried to earn the role of mother as if it were something I had to qualify for endlessly. I thought of the nights staring at the ceiling, wondering what crime I had committed to deserve cold shoulders and mocking smiles. I thought of the garage, the hidden letter in the cabinet, Miriam's trembling hand squeezing mine, whispering, "Don't wait for permission to live." And I thought of the woman I was becoming, slowly, quietly, in her own time, not the mother who always returned, but the woman who had finally learned to stay with herself. Mark held his breath. His eyes pleaded for forgiveness, for understanding, for a closure I wasn't obliged to provide. Not now. Perhaps not ever. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and placed a $20 bill on the table, tucked beneath the edge of my saucer. Then I stood, holding his gaze for a long, quiet moment. I saw the boy I once held on my hip and the man who had once told me to stay out of his life, both etched in his face. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Firm. Maternal. Final. And then I walked away. No dramatic exit, no slammed door, no cutting words. Just the soft click of my shoes on the tile, the gentle chime of the cafe door closing behind me, and a silence more potent than any yes or no. Sometimes silence says, "I love you, but I love me too." Sometimes silence says, "Not yet. Maybe never." And sometimes, for a mother who has given too much, silence is enough. Back home, I placed the last rose into the vase, letting its deep coral petals stretch toward the morning sun. The porch was quiet, save for the hum of bees among the lavender hedge. My knees ached from tending the garden beds, but I felt light, present. Not suspended in guilt or fear, simply here. The house behind me held its own quiet watch, walls filled with stories, some painful, some redemptive. I glanced through the kitchen window at the hallway where a new frame hung. Philip's letter pressed gently between glass and wood. I passed it every day, a blessing woven into my mornings as I rebuilt my rhythm. Not to serve, not to appease, but simply to live. Last week, Rachel had sent a drawing. Folded inside a crayon-smeared envelope, the image was unmistakable. Me in my straw sun hat, arranging flowers beneath the oak tree. At the bottom, in her bubbly handwriting, she had written, "This house is Grandma's and Grandma is sunshine." I had placed it just opposite Philip's letter, a quiet balance. His farewell, her beginning. Inside, the television played softly, not for sound but for the security feed. The camera showed the family SUV pulling into the lot of Midtown Wellness and Therapy Center, a modest building tucked beside a bookstore I used to visit. The angle shifted slightly, capturing the quiet arrival of people determined to do better. I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth of sunlight and tea settle over me, feeling the calm truth I had earned. I was finally here, fully in my own life. Mark stepped out first, opening the door for Serena, who followed slowly, cradling Rachel's pink journal, the same one I had given her after the hallway argument. She held it tightly as if it contained something sacred. Mark adjusted the strap of a well-worn backpack, and I noticed the title of a book peeking from the front pocket. Breaking Cycles, Healing Family Trauma. They moved toward the garden entrance in quiet rhythm. No rushing, no orders, just stillness, an unspoken understanding between them. Serena glanced back once, almost by habit, then kept walking. I didn't shed a tear. Thought I might. For so long, I had dreamed of seeing them choose a different path, stepping into a life that didn't demand I bend or vanish. And now here it was, gentle, real, and entirely mine. I opened the lilies I had set aside earlier. The blossoms spread their white petals in the sunlight, casting soft shadows across the embroidered tablecloth my mother had stitched decades ago. I thought of Miriam's words at the hospital. "Don't wait for anyone to give you permission to live your life." She hadn't commanded it, only offered it as a quiet blessing, a gift from someone who had finally stopped carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. I tucked that lesson close to my heart, right beside Philip's letter. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of wet earth and lemon balm. I closed my eyes and pictured young Evelyn, barefoot and calloused, hands heavy with everyone else's burdens. Then I saw the Evelyn of today, lines of age on her face, steady hands, still learning, no longer shrinking to make space for others. As I gathered the stems and tidied the table, Rachel's words after the spring storm came to mind. "Grandma, when the sun returns, flowers remember where to bloom." I smiled, feeling the truth of it sink in. And as this moment settled around me, I understood how the story ends. Not with triumph, not with resentment, but with clarity. I used to think that if I didn't hold the seams, everything would fall apart. Now I know they needed something different. They needed to see me stand.